The bottom line here is I would like you to tell me why, when countries around the rest of the world with fewer resources than we do are able to put labels on their product warning parents about the dangers of those products to their kids, how come the most powerful and wealthiest nation in the world is unable to do that? Dr. Califf?
With your permission, I'm leaving soon.
I heard that.
Not for this meeting, but from my job. So I'm going to provide editorial comments, and Mr. Jones can provide you a lot of facts. You asked, how long does it take? Let's talk about tobacco. We were instructed to do that many years ago. We have lost in court on that issue, and we're finally winning now, it looks like. But the point I want to make is what sounds simple, given the current state of judicial affairs, First Amendment rights, the fact that corporations have the same rights as individuals, every little thing we do, unless specifically in detail instructed by Congress,
Okay.
It's not just that we lose in court, but we lose years when that happens.
Let me, again, I apologize for interrupting, but don't have endless amounts of time. I understand all that. But are you going to tell us with a straight face that you have come before this committee and the American people and say, hey, we have a major, major crisis. We are losing lives. We're spending huge amounts of money. People's limbs are being amputated. We have got to act. And have you pointed a finger at those people who are the cause of the problem? Have you had the courage to take on a very powerful food and beverage industry? You know, there are 15 teaspoons of sugar in this product. How many parents in America know this when they give it to their kids? Say, here, have a Coke, go out and play ball. Have you done your job and your predecessors, not just you? Have you done your job in alerting the American people to the danger and rallying members of Congress to stand up to the special interests who are causing these problems?
With all due respect, I've been working on this problem for all of my career. This is what I've done, and I think I have talked about this very specifically. I think we all wish that we had gotten to the goal sooner that you described. I'm not contesting that. But I do believe in an appropriate discourse with this committee. We need to carefully reflect on the issues in play right now that would allow this to happen. And I'm really heartened to hear the bipartisan support for this, because much of what we try to do, frankly, gets blocked along the way. And we'll talk about that.
Let's be honest here. The food and beverage industry spends hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbying and on campaign contributions. You tell me the role that they are playing in destroying the health of America's children.
Well, I'm not going to contest your comment about the amount of money spent on lobbying. I think it's probably accurate. I don't have figures on that. But a lot of the changes that those of us who are interested in better health would like to make are blocked at the level of legislation for reasons that
but I'm still not hearing you. What is the reason that our kids are unhealthy? What role do this industry play? Even now, you're getting out of office. Are you prepared to tell us that this committee, this Congress needs to take on the food and beverage industry whose greed is destroying the health of millions of people?
Well, I'm not going to castigate the people that work in the food and beverage industry.
You're not.
No, what I will say.
That is your job.
No, it's not to castigate. It's to point out how to make progress in this area. We have an industry that if you tried to change it overnight, there are farmers all over the United States who would not be able to grow the crops they're currently growing. So there needs to be a plan, and it needs to be implemented in a mature, thoughtful way across the country. I'm 100%
the Academy
in
of
favor of the
Medicine
change.
in 2010. How many years does it take to do it? 14 years enough time? How many kids have died and gotten sick during those 14 years?
It's not just kids, it's adults, of course. I want to see it change as much as anyone, but we have to do it in a way that considers all the factors that are
protecting
involved
the interests of the food and beverage industry. Senator Cassidy, if there is a mantra that exists in this committee, I think on both sides of the aisle, is that an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. And that is going to be what we'll be discussing today. In America, it is no secret to anybody that we have a major obesity epidemic as well as an epidemic in diabetes. They are both directly related. and they are both getting worse. More than 35 million Americans have type 2 diabetes, over 10% of our population, 10% of our population, and about 90% of those with type 2 diabetes are obese. Diabetes is not only a serious illness unto itself, but it is a contributing factor to heart disease, stroke, amputations, blindness, and kidney failure. And the cost of treating these illnesses is staggering. According to the American Diabetes Association, the total cost of diabetes in the United States was nearly $413 billion. $413 billion, up 27% over the past 6 years. This amounts to about 10% of our total health care expenditures. That is an unbelievable and unsustainable amount of money. And when we talk about the type 2 diabetes epidemic and the huge increase in new cases, we must also talk about the epidemic of obesity in our country. Some 90% of people with type 2 diabetes are overweight or obese. These two epidemics go hand in hand. The time is long overdue for us to pose some very simple questions. And that is what this hearing is about today. How did it happen that, according to the CDC, the rate of childhood obesity in America has tripled since the 1970s and has gotten so bad that 1 out of every 5 children in our country is now obese? How has it happened that over 40% of adults in the United States today are obese? And in my view, the answers to these questions are not very complicated. For decades, Congress and the FDA have allowed large corporations to make huge profits by enticing children and adults to consume ultra-processed food and beverages loaded up with sugar, salt, and saturated fat. There is growing evidence, including testimony that we have heard right here in this committee, that these foods are deliberately designed to be addictive, similar to cigarettes and alcohol, and lead to a higher rate of type 2 diabetes. Shockingly, according to a study published in the British Medical Journal, ultra-processed foods make up an incredible 73% of our nation's food supply. Bottom line, much of the food that we as Americans are now consuming are making us unhealthy and are contributing to the fact that our life expectancy is significantly lower than that of many other wealthy countries. None of this is happening by accident. The food and beverage industry is spending $14 billion a year on advertising to push these unhealthy products onto the American consumer. Even worse, and really unacceptable, $2 billion of this money is spent to directly advertise these unhealthy products to our children in order to get them hooked on these foods at an early age. According to the Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity, children and teens view about 4,000 food and beverage ads on television each year, an average of 10 advertisements per day. Last year, for example, Coca-Cola spent $327 million on advertising in the United States alone, while it raked in more than $9.5 billion in profits. Not one of these ads will tell you that a 20-ounce bottle of Coke contains more than 15 teaspoons of sugar. 15 teaspoons of sugar, over twice the recommended daily limit for kids. Not one of these ads will tell you that drinking 1 can of Coke a day could increase your chance of getting type 2 diabetes by up to 26%. Given this reality, which has been widely discussed by scientists and doctors for decades, this really is not new news. The question then arises, what has the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, done to address these epidemics which have impacted the health of millions of Americans and costs us hundreds of billions of dollars each year? As far as I can tell, the answer is not much. Way back in 2010, the National Academy of Medicine recommended that the food and beverage industry be required to put nutrition labels on the front of their products that the American people could easily understand. That was in 2010. On June 13, 2023, the FDA announced that it would propose a rule to require the food and beverage industry to put nutrition labels on the front of their products no later than October of 2023. The FDA missed that deadline. On December 6, 2023, FDA announced that this proposed rule would be made public in June of 2024. The FDA missed that deadline. On July 5, 2024, the FDA announced that this proposed rule would be made public by October of 2024. The FDA missed that deadline. I have been told that on November 21st, 2024, after more than 14 years of inaction, the FDA finally sent this proposed rule to the Office of Management and Budget for their review, but it has still not been made public. That is unacceptable. In 2016, Chile implemented a law mandating warning labels on the front of unhealthy food and beverage products. After this law was implemented, calories consumed from these products went down by 24%. Similar labels were put into effect in Peru in 2019, in Israel and Mexico in 2020, in Uruguay in 2021, and in Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, and Venezuela from 2022 to 2024. Nearly 30 years ago, the FDA and Congress had the courage to take on a tobacco industry whose products killed over 400,000 Americans every year, including my father. And as a result of these actions, smoking rates among adults dropped from 43% in 1965 to 12% in 2023. Smoking rates among teens dropped even more significantly. That effort was a major success. Now is the time for us to seriously combat the type 2 diabetes and obesity epidemics in this country. In order to do that, we must have the courage to take on the greed of the food and beverage industry, which every day is undermining the health and well-being of our children. For starters, we need strong front-of-package food labels so that all consumers, especially children, can be warned as to which products are harmful to their health. Tobacco labels in the United States do not say high in tar, high in nicotine, high in carcinogens. They say cigarettes cause lung cancer, emphysema, and may complicate pregnancy. And let's be clear, not only must we put strong warning labels on unhealthy food and beverages, we must also ban junk food ads targeted to children. The National Institute of Health has estimated that if the United States banned fast food advertising marketed to children, we could cut the childhood obesity rate by 18%. This is not a radical idea. In the 1980s, Quebec banned junk food advertising to children under 13. Last summer, the World Health Organization called for countries to substantially reduce the marketing of junk food to children, and Norway announced that it would be banning all food and beverage advertisements to kids. Ireland, Portugal, South Korea, Spain, Taiwan, and several other major countries have either seriously restricted or banned junk food ads targeted to children. Not a radical idea. And finally, in my view, we have got to substantially, and this committee has dealt with this a whole lot, reduce the outrageously high prices of diabetes and weight loss drugs for Ozempic and Wegovy. In April, I introduced legislation to enact a federal ban on junk food advertising targeted toward children and to require the FDA to put strong warning labels on products high in added sugar, salt, and saturated fat. So, today is an important hearing. We're dealing with the health and well-being of many millions of our people. We're dealing with the need to substantially cut back on the hundreds of billions of dollars we now spend on diabetes. So we thank Dr. Califf and Mr. Jones for being with us. Senator Cassidy, the mic is yours.
Chair Sanders and Ranking Member Cassidy and members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to testify to discuss the agency's efforts to reduce the chronic disease burden in America and the role of our nutrition initiatives, such as the proposed front-of-package labeling rule, contribute to these efforts. I've had the great honor to serve as the commissioner of the FDA not once but twice. I came back to FDA because I believe strongly in its mission and workforce. Americans have entrusted us with regulating industries that bear the responsibility of producing and distributing products that are safe and improve health. While all the work FDA does is crucial, the greatest public health advancements we can make would be to improve the diet of Americans and eliminate the use of tobacco. The food we eat is contributing to America's unfortunate position with the lowest life expectancy among large high-income countries. I want to stress this, last place among large high-income countries in life expectancy. Nearly everyone knows and cares for someone with a chronic disease. 6 in 10 Americans have at least one chronic disease, and 4 in 10 have 2 or more chronic diseases. I am deeply aware of this because my 35-year clinical career has been spent in direct care of suffering people with cardiovascular disease. We all know that eating a nutritious, balanced diet is a challenge for many people. Products that may appear nutritious could be loaded with sodium. People can exceed the recommended daily limit for added sugars with a single 16-ounce bottle of soda. And over 70% of our food supply is considered ultra-processed. As a recent Wall Street Journal editorial put it, quote, Americans eat unhealthy food because the food system is designed to feed it to them, unquote. Meaningful change can only happen with serious action by Congress, the industry, and multiple state and federal agencies. And of course, we're here today because this includes a major role in accountability of the FDA. FDA is trying to do its part within its authorities and budget, but successful change in the trajectory of our health depends on reaching a societal consensus that we will do this together. When we pull the levers at our disposal, specific actions by FDA can have sweeping effects. When we required trans fat to be labeled on the nutrition facts label in 2006, we saw a nearly 80% drop in consumption because consumers picked different foods and industry reformulated their products. Establishing a front-of-pack label could be another landmark policy. Displaying certain nutrition information right on the front of the package would allow Americans to quickly and easily identify how foods can fit into a healthy dietary pattern. The health impact of ultra-processed foods is at the forefront of current policy considerations, and the clear association between ultra-processed food and negative health outcomes is a major concern. While there is still much we need to understand, ultra-processed foods are usually high in saturated fat, sodium, and added sugars, and there is already substantial evidence of harm when these nutrients are consumed in excess. We are not waiting to act where the evidence is clear. In addition to front-of-pack nutrition labeling, FDA is working to reduce sodium across the food supply, update the, quote, healthy, unquote, claim on food packages, and strengthen our chemical safety review program. There is good reason to be concerned about the chemicals that are routinely included in much of our food. FDA has limited resources to deal with this issue, despite repeated requests for funding for much-needed additional experts to do the evaluations. There are years of work under each of these initiatives that are performed by highly qualified and dedicated staff in the face of multiple limitations in the existing science, extensive legal hurdles, and direct opposition from powerful industry forces. We have just completed the largest reorganization in FDA's history, in no small part, so that we could take on the issues of nutrition and chemicals in our food supply. As you know, I'll be leaving FDA at the change of administrations, but I can assure you that our people at FDA want to do more, and we need your partnership. As a cardiologist, I've spent most of my career dealing with the tragedy of premature death and disability, but my time in Washington has made me aware of how hard it is to address these policy issues. Our nation's complex financial and industrial interests, combined with our national instinct to favor individual freedom to choose, even if the choice is one that impairs health, make it difficult to take actions that have been successfully deployed by many other countries. And I believe these differences directly lead to better health and longer life in every other large high-income country compared with ours. In my opinion, finding a better consensus on these issues in America is not just an opportunity, but a necessity for the future of our country. Thanks for the opportunity to testify today, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you again, Dr. Califf. I agree with much of what you said in your testimony. I agree with much of what Senator Cassidy said. But the problem is that the issue we're talking about today is not a new issue, is it? 2010, the National Academy of Medicine recommended that the food and beverage industry be required to put nutritional labels that the American people could easily understand on the front of their packages. According to the CDC, the rate of childhood obesity in America has tripled since the 1970s. And from where I'm standing here, the FDA has not responded in any way with the urgency of the crisis. How long does it take to put a bloody label on a product?
I want to ask you about Red 3 and Red 40, both of you, and get your comments on this. It's not a conservative or a liberal standpoint. I think we all need to understand as a group about how we've gotten to this point. The FDA has a position that food colorings like 40 are safe for kids' ingestion. Do both of you stand behind that, Dr. Califf?
I'm going to refer that to Mr. Jones.
Okay.
We have not evaluated Red 40 in over a decade. Over a decade ago,
We have not.
We have not. At FDA, we have not evaluated the safety of Red 40 in over a decade. So over a decade, that was the conclusion that FDA made.
But we have evaluated. We are in the process of evaluating Red 3, and you may want to comment on that.
Well,
right.
let me say this. Red 3 has been known to cause cancer in cosmetics, but we still allow it to be put in our food. I don't understand that. Go ahead.
So Red 3, we have a petition in front of us to revoke the authorization for it, and we are hopeful that within the next few weeks we will be acting on that petition, and a decision should be forthcoming.
Tell us that process. How does that work? The timeline, if we know something's deadly for anybody that ingests it, how do we continue to just study that and not say, hey, enough's enough?
So Red 3 presents an interesting example for us. It is actually known to be cancer in laboratory animals, rats, but the scientific consensus is that the mechanism of carcinogenicity in rats is not applicable in humans. However, under the FFDCA, which is the law that we implement, any chemical that is shown to be carcinogenic in animals or humans, or should I say humans or animals, cannot be authorized by FDA. It's called the Delaney Clause. And so even though we don't believe there is a risk to humans under the Delaney Clause of the FFDCA, red dye, because it is known to cause cancer in laboratory animals, should not be authorized. And so that is what has been challenged FDA for many years, is how to manage around the Delaney Clause, where you have a scenario where, although there may be cancer evidence in animals, there is also evidence that is not harmful to humans.
I hope the FDA feels a responsibility to humans. Dr. Califf, you've probably heard quite a bit about this for the last 4 years that you've been serving us. Has this been a priority? Because we hear it, constantly about the dyes. I mean, dyes are just coloring. It has nothing to do with the taste or anything like that.
Yeah, a couple of things. So first of all, it is a priority, and I want to point out, listen carefully to what Mr. Jones said. We don't have data in humans that number 3 causes cancer, but we have it in laboratory animals. And so this gets complicated. And I want to remind you of what it takes to demonstrate that a substance that people eat causes cancer. You have to study a large number of people over a long period of time, because if something caused cancer right away, it would be obvious. But in these cases, you need something different. And I want to point out We have a very small staff that can do this based on the budget. We have repeatedly asked for better funding for chemical safety. I brought Mr. Jones in to head the Human Foods Program because of his history of working on environmental issues. I think it is a huge priority. He's an expert in this. Please look at our request for funding for the people who do this work. Remember that when we do ban something, it will go to court. And if we don't have the scientific evidence, it will stand up in court. We will lose in court.
Okay, I want to ask you this, and I think everybody in here wants to hear the answer to this question. We all hear Europe uses different dyes because they've come up with their evaluation that it does cause problems for humans. Do we have a different review system than they do about food dyes or anything put in food?
The biggest distinction between the U.S. and Europe is that they have been doing post-market review of chemicals now for over 20 years. In the FDA, although we have authorization to do post-market reviews, there's no statutory mandate to do them. One of the things that Dr. Califf mentioned is that as part of this reorganization, we are dedicating an entire office whose job is to do post-market chemical reviews. But we are several decades behind Europeans and our Canadian counterparts because they have legal mandates to reevaluate chemicals that have been authorized at some point in the past. We don't, but we are going to undertake it. We are going to definitely struggle with the resources necessary to do that.
There's a real lesson here from, I don't know if you eat Fruit Loops. I grew up every once in a while eating Fruit Loops. But there's a real lesson here, and I haven't verified this myself, but it's widely written, that when the dyes that make Fruit Loops bright were taken out for the reasons that you give, the sales went straight down, and they were put back in. So as long as we have a consumer-driven system where what people like in the short term is what drives the system, unless we have help from you all, that is clear direction from Congress, particularly given the recent Supreme Court decisions, it's going to be really hard for us to mandate things come off. Okay. Just a point I'm going to make over and over, and I apologize, but I think it's really important that we work together on this.
Thank you. Thank you for your points.
Senator Murray, let me kind of summarize my sense of where we are. Number one, I'm not quite sure that the urgency of the issue has been made as apparent as it should be, but we are dealing with an extraordinary crisis. When 1 out of 5 of our kids is obese, when millions of people are struggling with diabetes, when we spend, according to the American Diabetes Association, over $400 billion a year treating diabetes and other related illnesses, we have a major crisis. Dr. Califf mentioned a few moments ago, and I hope you correct me if I'm misstating the essence of what you said. You said in so many words that the food industry is designing products, designing food that is unhealthy and addictive. You suggested that these foods impact the brain the way that opioids do. Is that a fair paraphrasing of what you said?
I would say it a bit differently. The general concepts are in play. The word addiction is a very
You used the word
word.
addiction, did you not?
I used it with several other words around it that said it was just my opinion, not the view of the FDA as a policy, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done to nail that down.
All right, but we have had witnesses here who have said exactly that in a previous hearing. So there is serious opinion.
There's no doubt that when you eat this ultra-processed food, you want to eat more of it, which, whether that's addiction or not is...
Sounds to me like it's an addiction. And that's something that is intentionally being done by an industry which spends huge amounts of money, as you've indicated, advertising those products to children, correct?
Advertising is powerful. I've had personal experience with it.
All right. So the issue is not complicated. You have an industry that makes huge profits by making our children sick. and causing taxpayers to spend huge amounts of money. The question is whether or not the United States Congress will have the courage to take on the lobbyists who surround Capitol Hill, representing the interest of the food industry, whether they'll have the courage to stand up to the campaign contributions from the industry that come flooding into our campaigns. But I would hope that for the sake of our country, and the point that you made, very important point, our life expectancy in the richest country on earth is lower than every other major industrialized country. Is that correct? And the point you made about some states, I would put it in a different way, and that is working class people have life expectancies between 5 and 10 years shorter than upper income people. Is that true?
Yes. Education and wealth are two of the biggest factors
right.
in these differences.
So this is an issue that we have got to get a handle on, and it will require courage to stand up to some very powerful special interests. I hope the Congress is prepared to do that.